Hi, Karen Williams here with Coyote Blues, a contemporary werewolf, specifically a were-coyote story, and second chance romance. I'll be reading from the prologue, which takes place 25 years before the story begins. Riley Edith Dawson was born with a tail. All vertebrate animals begin life with one, but in humans it recedes during embryonic development to form the coccyx. On rare occasions, however, a baby will be born with a fleshy appendage containing nerves and muscle, and rarer still, there may be bone, up to 5 vertebrae, resulting in a true vestigial tail that can contract and move and, who knows, maybe wag if left to itself. Such was the case with Riley. The tail was removed, of course, and it wasn't until the age of 6, when her adoptive parents moved from Boston to New York, that she learned she'd ever had one. Riley sat on the examination table of her new pediatrician's office that morning, patiently swinging her legs while in the next room her mother and Dr. Blacksburg discussed her medical history. When her mother's voice dropped to a whisper, she slid off the crinkly paper and tiptoed to the door. It was open just a crack. Riley brushed her sandy bangs from her forehead and peeked in with one eye. "We never actually saw the tail," the well-spoken and impeccably dressed Mrs. Dawson explained to the doctor. "Riley was a foundling, discovered in the woods by hikers on the Appalachian Trail in Massachusetts." Riley silenced her gasp with both hands. The fact of being adopted was no surprise, but the part about the tail came as quite a shock. "All we were told," Mrs. Dawson went on, "is that the placenta was still attached, and so is the tail," Dr. Blacksburg finished for her. "Fascinating." He scratched his balding head, flipping through the medical records on his desk. "No tethered spinal cord? No spinal bifida?" "Oh, no, nothing like that. Riley was perfectly healthy, aside from mild developmental delays." "Reaching milestones?" he asked. "Yes, well, it took her a while to talk, and she crawled until the age of 2. Not that anything was wrong with her legs. She crawled faster than other toddlers could run." Daintily clearing her throat, Mrs. Dawson folded her well-manicured hands neatly in her lap. "She's perfectly fine now, just a little quirky." "Quirky?" "I shouldn't say quirky. Skittish is more like it. We just bought an apartment here on Fifth Avenue, and Riley's having difficulty adjusting to city life. The constant cacophony of crowds and traffic have her somewhat gun-shy, her father says. The first time I took her shopping on Fifth Avenue, she bolted across the street in a wild panic, ran straight into Central Park. Why, I was almost hit by a taxi, nearly trampled by a carriage horse trying to catch her." Dr. Blacksburg's grimace was so intense his lips were stretched clear across his teeth. "Was your daughter ever screened for a pervasive developmental disorder? Like autism?" "Autism?" Mrs. Dawson's face flushed, and her tone became indignant. "Absolutely not." She smoothed the temple of her coiffed hair, straightened her back so that she was perfectly postured in her chair. "My daughter is an affectionate and socially connected child doctor, and as you'll soon discover, she has a terrific sense of humor. The audiologist we saw placed her hearing at the extreme high end of normal range. He's convinced it's her sensitive hearing that makes city life such a challenge." Mrs. Dawson put a hand to her chest, nervously fiddling with the large diamond pendant that adorned her neck. It was 1 carat shy of ostentatious. "Last week we took Riley to the Met for a production of The Magic Flute. It was her first opera, and she was enthralled, as we hoped. But when the female soprano's voice ascended beyond the usual 2 octaves, Riley began to wail like, some sort of animal. The entire audience turned and stared. I was mortified." Mrs. Dawson reached for her diamond again, rubbing the extravagance between her fingers like a worrystone, something to ease the embarrassment of what she was about to confide. It wasn't the first time Riley made noises like that. As an infant, she made strange little sounds in her sleep, gurgly little growls, piercing yips, which, frankly, Doctor, scared the jeepers out of me. My husband thought I was being ridiculous, but knowing my daughter was born in the woods to an Unknown mother and with a tail, she said, clearly horrified that such a monstrosity had ever hung from her otherwise perfect little girl. I will confess that on more than one occasion I wondered if Riley might be half human and... What, half wolf? It's a silly thought, I know. Dr. Blacksburg removed his glasses, slipping them into the pocket of his white coat, and chuckled with paternal, if not condescending, assurance. Mrs. Dawson, he said, folding his hands on his desk and addressing her squarely, the human tail is not a vestige of our ancestry. Contrary to what Darwin believed, it is not an evolutionary regression. The human tail, Mrs. Dawson, is an aberration, an abnormality caused by improper forming of the neural tube. In almost all documented cases, there are spinal deformities. I'd say it's a medical miracle that your daughter isn't severely disabled. As I said, Doctor, she's perfectly healthy, strong, agile, fast as lightning. And Riley was. She went on to become a superior athlete in high school, excelling in track and field and in touch football with neighborhood boys on the weekends. Wily Riley, they called her. She could outrun and outmaneuver the best of players. She never did get up the nerve to ask about her tail. Mrs. Dawson wasn't the type of mother to ease a child's concerns, but Riley always secretly wondered about her lost appendage. Curled up at night with her dog, she often fell asleep running her hand along the length of his bushy tail, trying to imagine what hers might have looked like if someone hadn't gone and chopped it off. But one night, soon after her 17th birthday, just a few hours after making love with Fiona Bell, her tail grew back. Dr. Blacksburg was wrong. It appeared Darwin had been right.
Hi, my name is Lynn C. Miller, and I'm here today to talk about my fourth novel, The Unmasking, which came out last fall in October. Here is the cover. I'll begin with a short summary of the novel. In The Unmasking, three friends, Bettina, Miriam, and Fiona, suspect murder when their university dean dies in a one-car accident after embezzling university funds. They travel to a resort in New Mexico, where they join others in performing remarkable women from history, such as Gertrude Stein, Virginia Woolf, Mabel Dodge Lujan, Victoria Woodhull, and Edith Wharton. But when one woman is kidnapped and another disappears, the friends' lives are forever changed. They realize that the masks we wear often hide chilling truths. The locked room convention I mentioned is an old one that has had great staying power, from popular examples such as Agatha Christie's And Then There Were None, to the recent movie Knives Out. There's usually only one way in and one way out of the locked room. Yet in this kind of a mystery, the key is, how was someone able to enter the space where the crime occurred, murder his or her victim, and exit without seemingly leaving a clue? In these stories, characters are often confined together in a remote setting. All have motives: a secret affair, a lust for revenge of an old slight, a desire to inherit large sums. More than one person is usually killed. Miriam, in her keynote on the locked room mystery that she gives at the festival, puzzles through the crime of Dean Alec Martin's death that on the surface seemed like an accident, and yet which was carefully orchestrated. I ask you to contemplate a mind facile and arrogant enough to predict that an act of premeditated violence would appear 100 times out of 100 as just a bad break. Casual, unfortunate, just one of life's little surprises, like a slip on a slick staircase, or a skid in the shower, or a burst vessel in the brain. It was something that could happen to anyone at any time. But Alec's death would not have happened at any time, just at one. On a Friday morning at rush hour, in the 1-mile drive from the victim's home to his neighborhood grocery. Call it designer's delight. Call it devil's play. Call it the perfect crime. In the novel, the lodge functions as a series of locked rooms with mysterious accidents and events occurring and no one feeling that they can leave. There's a feeling of claustrophobia. Inside the lodge is a traditional locked room, a storage closet with no windows and only one door. But when it is opened, something surprising is inside. I'll read from a scene where Miriam and the investigating officer, Lieutenant Susan Crane, enter the locked storage room hoping to find the missing Barbara, the dean's wife who is having an affair with the festival's Gertrude Stein. Barbara is playing the writer and patron of the arts, Mabel Dodge Luhan, at the festival. They glided into the entry, through the great room, which held only a large round table for the final festival participants' dinner that evening, and into the small dining area by the kitchen. In that space, even the art on the hand-plastered walls, usually so bold in its design throughout the lodge, appeared tentative and hushed, as if waiting for someone or something. A simple pencil drawing of a horse alone in a field, a watercolor of a stream making its way alongside a road. Liminal zones, thought Miriam, places where people were not here or there, but on the way to becoming. Lieutenant Crane put her ear to the door of the storage room. "Silence," she whispered. She waved Miriam forward. As Miriam laid a hand against the cool wooden door and listened, she too could hear nothing stirring inside. Slowly, Crane extended her hand and cradled it around the doorknob, her face creased in strain. Impatiently, she brushed strands of hair off her forehead with the other hand, then tensed her arm and turned the knob. The door swung open. The storage room loomed in front of them like a black pit. If quiet could make a sound, the room echoed with emptiness. The detective moved ahead. Behind her, Miriam was startled to see a gun in Susan Crane's hand leveled into the center of the room. The detective slapped the wall with her other hand and flipped the light switch. A fluorescent light in the ceiling cast its unrelenting glare on the table and shelves. Canned goods and old appliances, a small fan with a bent blade, a toaster, a tiny microwave lined the shelves. The table was dust-free and empty. Nothing was on the scuffed wooden floor but an old pair of boots, neatly lined up to the kickboards to the right of the door. "Look!" Miriam pointed at the coat rack. Barbara's Mabel Dodge Luhan costume hung from one curved arm, limp, its black seed pearls glinting in the harsh light. The two women edged forward. Pinned to the right shoulder of the gown was a white note with a single word typed upon it. "Goodbye." I'll stop here with lots of thanks to the folks who organized this year's ReadOut. I'm Lynn C. Miller, and my book is called The Unmasking. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kelly Wacker, and I'll be reading from my novel Aspen and Moonlight. It's a contemporary romance with a paranormal twist, and it's got quite a bit of nature and art woven into the story. The main characters are Melissa Warren, an art historian who's trying to find out more about the artist who made 3 old paintings she inherited from her grandmother. In the process, she meets a biologist and director of the Colorado Bear Conservancy, Sula Johansson, who also has a big secret to keep. In this scene, Sula talks with Betty, a family friend and wise old ranchwoman. It was a regular Sunday dinner with Betty's family. Well, everything was regular about it, except Sula. She was feeling highly irregular, her mind preoccupied with all things Melissa. She didn't think anyone had noticed that she wasn't fully present, but the look on Betty's face as she scraped the leftover pot roast into a glass bowl told her otherwise. "Sula, what's up with you? You feel okay?" "I'm fine." Sula put the plates in the sink and began rinsing them. "You don't look fine, and you're not acting fine." Putting a lid on the bowl, Betty slid it onto a shelf in the refrigerator. She narrowed her eyes at Sula and put the palm of her hand on her forehead. You don't have a fever. I'm not sick. Okay, so what's on your mind? Leave the plates in the sink. I'll take care of them later. Why do you think something's on my mind? Sula grabbed a kitchen towel and dried her hands. Because I know you. Betty refilled her coffee cup and took a sip. You want another slice of honey cake? Sure. Sula always wanted another slice of the Norwegian dessert, a dense, dark cake sweetened with honey and flavored with cinnamon and clove. Coffee? No thanks, I'm good. Betty sliced a piece and carried it over to the breakfast nook and sat down, pushing the plate across the table. Sit. Sula sat and ate the cake while Betty drank coffee, stared at her, and tapped her nails lightly against the side of the cup. You might as well tell me now. You know you will eventually. Sula took the last bite of cake and put the fork down with a sigh. Betty could always see through her. When Sula had figured out she liked girls instead of boys, Betty was the first person she talked to about it. They'd had the conversation at this very table, tucked into the corner of the kitchen, in fact. Sula remembered that it was in the fall because Betty had handed her a slice of apple pie and commanded her to sit down and talk. Some things never changed. I like Melissa Warren. I like her too. What's she got to do with... Betty stopped herself and laughed. Oh, you mean you like her? Don't laugh. It's not funny. I'm sorry. I know it's not funny, but you're funny, Sula. Melissa's a very nice person. Very smart. Attractive, too. Betty paused and took a sip of coffee. Is she not gay? Is that what's got you all out of sorts? Oh, she's very much a lesbian. Betty wagged her eyebrows. Did she kiss you? Betty! Did you kiss her? Exasperated, Sula just grunted. So, did you? Betty watched her reaction and then waved a hand at her dismissively. You don't need to answer. I can tell by that look on your face that you did. You're blushing, too. It's a good thing, right? What's the problem? I'm really happy to see you connect with someone. You are? Of course I am. Look, Sula, I worry about you being alone all the time. I know you value your privacy and all that, but it doesn't mean you have to be a nun, you know? I know, but my life is a little complicated. Sure, your complications are different from most people's, but life is complicated, so you make it work. Your parents made it work. Betty lowered her voice. So what's really eating at you? I asked her to go to Denver with me. Why Denver? I'm giving a presentation on Tuesday at a symposium at the Wildlife Refuge, and I invited her. So, sounds like a nice day trip. Visit the Mile High City and all that. You'll have a good time. I'm spending the night. I give a presentation on Tuesday, and then I have a meeting with people at Fish and Wildlife on Wednesday. Betty reached across the table and put her hand on Sula's. If Melissa didn't feel comfortable with your invitation, she'd have declined. You have a good head on your shoulders, and you make good decisions. Do what feels right. Listen to your gut, and it'll be okay. And stop worrying, Sula. You know I'm always right. Betty stood and carried her cup to the sink. Or maybe that's what you're afraid of. Sula fidgeted in her seat. Betty was right, though Sula was hesitant to admit it. Her attraction to Melissa felt so natural, she suspected that she had only begun to sense its depths. It felt like wading into the river to swim and putting your foot down, expecting to feel smooth rock against the bottom of your feet, only to feel cold water rush by as you dropped into a deep pool with the water over your head. Exciting, but scary. Yet her instinct wasn't telling her to run. Quite the opposite. It was goading her to get closer. Damn, she felt so conflicted. Stop overthinking it, Sula, or you might talk yourself out of something good. Betty tossed a hand towel over her shoulder and walked over to Sula. She put her hand on Sula's shoulder, squeezed it, and frowned. Good grief, you're bound up tighter than a spool of baling wire. You ought to go out for a run, let your hair down for a while, balance your chi or whatever it is that happens when you're out there. You always say it makes you feel better. Sula nodded, envisioning a run through the forest, suddenly reminded her of something she wanted to check on before she left town. What Betty had just suggested would make that a lot more efficient, and she was right. It would also make her feel more in balance. Her anxiety about Melissa remained, but now that she had something immediate to do, it would take her mind off it, even if momentarily. It's a good idea, Betty. Sula stood and tried her best to put on a convincing smile. She reached out, wrapping her arms around Betty in a bear hug, and kissed the top of her head. You're the best, you know it? Betty patted her on the back and pulled out of her embrace, popping her with the towel. All right, all right. Get out of my kitchen. Well, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this little bit of Aspen and Moonlight. If you'd like to know more, you can check out my website, which is kellywacker.com.
Hello, Gulfport. I'm Meredith Doench, and I am beaming into you from Dayton, Ohio, where I am sure the weather is much worse than it is in Gulfport. I'm going to be reading to you today from a segment in my third book, which is called Deadeye. It was the third in the series about Luce Hansen. She works for the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation and specializes in capturing serial killers. So I'm going to be reading you from chapter 1. So this really doesn't need much setup other than to say that Luce Hansen, and her partner Bennett are on a much needed vacation over Thanksgiving weekend at a resort near Charleston, South Carolina. The sun sank low on the South Carolina horizon. I leaned back in my seat, let the paddle rest across my lap, and welcomed the familiar bump of Harper Bennett's kayak against mine. The ocean resort directed us to a small inlet where the water shimmered with an evening calm, and views of the sunset burned an array of colors. Bennett and I had settled into a silence as the water gently rocked us. This, I thought, was the true measure of trust with another person, how long that comfortable silence could hold. When the sun became only a burning orange sliver, Bennett said, "I've been meaning to check in with you, with us." Bennett worried that my work as a serial killer profile for the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation would lead to my eventual demise. My work always had a way of digging its hooks into me, of gripping tight my mind, body, and soul in a way that made my breath quicker and my heart beat stronger. Nothing, absolutely nothing else had ever made me feel more alive than the hunt for a serial killer and the need for justice. I will not be that woman who stands by her partner's grave after she has been murdered by some senseless idiot while on the job, Bennett said. I won't be that sobbing widow who they hand the folded flag to, the one who nearly faints when the blank shots fire from the gun salute. Come on, Ben, that's not going to happen. I reached across our kayaks for her hand. But you can't promise that. I squeezed her hand. I also can't promise you I won't die of a heart attack, a car wreck, or cancer. Suddenly my air raid siren ringtone screamed, the one I'd assigned to all work-related calls. For a second, both of us froze. Then Bennett hollered, "You brought your phone on the water? What about our rule?" I hated the rule, and I regularly defied it. Floating time, according to Bennett, was unplugging time. No phones, no music, no texting, no email checking. The world can wait, she always told me, at least until we come in from the water. It's not a safe rule, Bennett, I said, reaching for the phone. Something could happen. You're a special agent and I'm a doctor, she said. Who else could we possibly need in an emergency? The phone siren screamed again. I didn't want to argue, but this mattered. It mattered a lot because of Marcy Tucker. I'd struggled long and hard with the effects of PTSD since I found my first love murdered. It had taken years for me to come to terms with the fact that the murder might not have happened if I had been on time to meet Marcy, if I hadn't have gotten caught up in traffic jam on the highway, if I had taken a different route to the caverns. If. This tiny word endlessly needled me, particularly when it came to the death of Marcy Tucker. Hansen, I finally said into the phone. Gobble, gobble. Colby Sanders gave a sad attempt at a joke, and I suddenly missed my co-director at the BCI. I hope you're having a good time down there, Hansen, but we need you. A prison break at Hartford Correctional. My mind turned over everything I knew about that Ohio prison. High security, older facility, some disturbing reports of officer violence on inmates. Please tell me this has nothing to do with Deadeye, I said. His silence on the other end of the line told me it did. He's a high-risk inmate, I said. How could this even happen? A transport situation and a lot of help from the outside, Sanders told me. I pressed the heel of one hand against my forehead, where a headache teased me. Holidays tended to be a time on prison campuses when officials let their guard down, when fewer eyes focused in on the inmates. Clearly, I wasn't the only one who knew the secret. How long has he been gone? 4 hours, Sanders said. Search teams are combing the area. As Sanders went on about the flight details out of Charleston, I thought about Deadeye. The serial predator had been hunting humans long before I joined the BCI, and was finally apprehended in southeast Ohio after murdering at least 6 victims, hunter style, in the rural hunting area of Simmons County. Deadeye was better than a good shot. Generally, the victims were taken with a single bullet through the head, and he always removed and took with him the victim's blood-stained shirt, his trophy of death. Deadeye loose on the streets was more than dangerous. It was explosive. Hanson, Sanders said, you with me? I blinked myself back to focus. I'll see you in a few hours, I said. I looked out over the glass-calm water. The evening breeze felt good against my face. Hanson, Bennett said, what is going on? It's Deadeye. Her eyes widened at his name. He's on the lam, I said, and handed Bennett my paddle and then rolled away from her, the weight of my body spinning the kayak upside down. Salty water enveloped me as I slipped out of the kayak and let my body sink into the cool, thick darkness. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Elle E, and tonight I'm going to be reading to you from the second book in my Stormfronts trilogy, Patchwork, from DSP Publications. In this scene, we have 3 characters: Vic Corin, who is half human, half machine after a training accident. We have VC1, who is the implant in Vic's brain, who is actually evolved into an artificial intelligence. And we have Kelly, Vic's romantic partner, who is an empath who helps Vic deal with a lot of her emotional instability after the accident. In this scene, they are visiting Kelly's family at a family reunion at a beachfront island resort, and they've just arrived and are preparing to go down to the beach for their first meal. This scene is told from Kelly's point of view. Go throw on a bathing suit and let's head down to the beach. I'm starving. Vic pauses in the doorway, seeming to just now notice I'm in my hot pink bikini. Her eyes linger in all the right places, meaning I'm likely blushing as bright as the suit, but something is wrong. You don't have a bathing suit, do you? Vic shakes her head. How about shorts, a t-shirt? She nods, some of the attention leaving her shoulders. Is she really that uptight about vacation attire? I send out a tendril of empathic inquiry, but she's got her suppressors on higher than she should. Give me a second, I'll change. She disappears up the stairs. I wait in one of the porch rockers, taking deep lungfuls of salty ocean air and the sweet aroma of some of the flowering bushes lining the paths to the various buildings. A bird of some sort with a long beak and wide wingspan glides overhead, crying out to its fellows in long, high-pitched calls. Tiny lizards chase each other over the stones and shells, disappearing into the shrubbery. I'm more relaxed than I've been in months. I wish Vic would unwind and appreciate all this natural beauty. She reappears a couple of minutes later, long dark hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, a black t-shirt accentuating her muscular arms and impressive abs. Army green cargo shorts reveal powerful legs capable of taking down an enemy with a single kick. She's barefoot, which surprises me, until I realize she probably doesn't have shoes other than the combat boots she wears daily, and even Vic would recognize that those won't work as vacation garb. We stroll the pathways in companionable silence, sunset turning the cottages, trees, and plants to varying shades of purples, oranges, and deep blues. I'm admiring the beauty, but from the way Vic peers into every shadow, she's likely scanning for threats and analyzing potential escape routes. At ease, Vic. You sent the Sunfires on a wild goose chase, I remind her. You're not a soldier today. You're on vacation. Her dark eyes meet mine. I'm a soldier every day. I don't remember how else to be. We arrive at the beach before I can come up with a comforting response, but to be honest, I'm not sure if that response would be to comfort Vic or myself. Friends and family wave to us from their scattered places on the sand, some lounging, some tossing a flying disc back and forth, others hitting a volleyball over a net, and a few already in line for the resurrected buffet. The scents of barbecue ribs, chicken, burgers, and hot dogs waft on the ocean breeze. Palm trees with spine-covered coconuts and blue-green fronds rustle overhead. Waves crash on the shore. It's perfect. Now if I can just convince Vic to let her guard down. I take her hand in mine as a chorus of high-pitched, excited shrieks reaches our ears. Vic tenses, her free hand dropping to her side in a weapon that isn't there. Muscles in her back tighten in preparation for a fight. Through our bond, I project all the calm I can muster and wait until she releases her breath before I turn toward the source of the sound. I'm enveloped almost immediately in a group hug, 3 new sets of arms wrapping around my shoulders and torso, greetings and giggles drowning me in an undecipherable cacophony. It separates me from Vic, me losing my grasp on her hand in the midst of the laughing swarm of bodies. I hope she can tell I'm in no danger. When I'm gasping for breath, I'm released, and I blink into the setting sun at my 3 best friends from the academy, Tanya, Rochelle, and Lily, all beaming at me. Vic standing just behind them, a bemused expression on her face at their enthusiasm, and a little sadness there too. Is she having a memory flash of friends like these long gone? Or is she wishing she would? Tanya and Lily grab my hands, attempting to drag me toward the umbrella they have set up, complete with a cooler of sweating bottled beverages and multicolored towels laid out. But I dig my flip-flops into the sand and halt my forward momentum. Guys, this is Vic, I hesitate, not quite sure what Vic wants me to call her. What will embarrass her the least? Vic shakes her head at my indecision and steps forward. I'm her girlfriend, she affirms. A goofy smile spreads across my face. I'm not sure Vic's ever referred to me that way in public. She grins back. I introduce my former classmates, all of them taking in Vic in all her formidableness. Tanya looks surprised, her eyebrows stretching to the top of her forehead. Openly lesbian since I met her, Lily smiling an I knew it all the time smile, while Rochelle, my very best friend of them all, beams happily at me and gives me another hug. I knew you'd find the right person for you, she whispers against my ear. You make an adorable couple. The words are meant only for me, but of course Vic's enhanced hearing picks up every syllable and her cheeks flush pink. She turns away to hide it, pretending to swat at one of the harmless but annoying local flying insects. When she faces us again, the blush is gone. Neat trick. Vic and VC1 are working in tandem more and more often. I'm not certain how I feel about that. They always operate in concert with each other, of course, to maintain Vic's essential bodily systems, but the non-essential... I swallow my concern, determined to focus on positives. So long as VC1 does what Vic asks, it's fine. I hope. Thanks for listening. I hope you'll enjoy the rest of it at some point and have a wonderful evening.
Hi, my name's Toni Logan. I'm from Phoenix, Arizona, and I'll be reading from my book, Share the Moon, copyrighted 2021 with Bold Strokes Books. And it's set on a vineyard in Northern California, and one of the 2 main characters is a ghost named Ruth. Kate sat bareback on Ginger, her mellow 22-year-old quarter horse that she rescued. First thing every morning, Kate took Ginger on an easy stroll around the property as part of her recovery therapy. Hey, Kate announced as she rode up to Jamie. Jamie leaned a shovel against the golf cart as she reached out and gently stroked Ginger above her nose. The horse responded by lowering her head and wrestling it into Jamie's chest. Jamie glanced up. Hey, Kate? Yeah? Of all the times you've seen Ruth hanging around, did you ever? Jamie gestured by bobbing her head sideways. You know. Don't suppose you could throw a few more words out, Kate said. You know, those pesky little things that when strung together make a complete sentence? Did you ever, speak to her? What? Yeah, we kind of spoke last night, Jamie leaned in, as in actually talked. I understand the definition of the word, Kate said. Jamie closed her eyes and let out a long sigh that tingled throughout her body as she exhaled. She has a beautiful voice and face. Kate sat a little taller on Ginger. Beautiful, huh? What? No, she's a ghost. I mean, how creepy is that, right? The thought of kissing Ruth flashed in Jamie's head. Would her lips be as soft as they looked, or would they be, oh my God, Jamie, get a grip. Ruth was a ghost, as in back from the dead. Kissing her, no matter how kissable her lips looked, was still kissing a deceased person. Kate gently stroked Ginger's neck as she smiled. Well, did she say what happened to her? Nah, we didn't get that far in our conversation. Well, how far did you get? She told me I had a cracker crumb on my forehead and that her name was Ruth, Jamie said as her cheeks flushed. Kate threw her head back and laughed. Isn't this freaking you out, even the slightest? Jamie was taken aback by Kate's comfortable reaction. Or was she taken aback by the fact that the only woman who had stirred her desire in over 3 years was a ghost? Honey, this is California, Kate said. I've seen some weird-ass shit in my time that makes Ruth walking around the vineyard child's play. About time an introduction was made. Jamie stood silent and stared, focusing on Kate's mouth moving, but not comprehending a word she was saying. After an awkward moment of silence, Kate leaned down and snapped a finger in front of Jamie's face. You doing okay in that brain of yours? I talked to a ghost, Kate, a ghost, and not only that, she was beautiful. I skipped right over the insanity of having a conversation with a dead person and went right for the attraction. I actually had a physical reaction to a non-physical person, so no, right now, I'm not doing so well in this brain of mine, Jamie exhaled in one breath. Jamie, you've seen Ruth walking around this land since you were a child. She's familiar to you. Oh no, don't you dare try to normalize this, Kate. Everything about this is certifiable and you know it. Look, I'm not discounting what you're feeling, and yes, on the surface, being attracted to a ghost is kind of out there, but I wouldn't overanalyze this. We all know where it would land you on most people's radar, but I don't really give a shit what people think. And you know what, Jamie? There's a wonderful freedom in that. So my advice, just go with it. I don't claim to know anything about ghosts, but there has to be some reason she's still sticking around. And if she approached you, maybe something's up. Jamie let out a sigh and remained silent. Why did Ruth approach her after all these years? Why now, and why her? Ginger started pawing the ground. Well, anyway, we better get a move on. Ginger needs to get her walking time in, Kate said as she nudged the horse forward. Hi, Ruth materialized in the golf cart. Jamie jumped as she slapped her hand across her chest. Jeez. Sorry. I seem to keep startling you, Ruth apologized. Maybe we can come up with a warning signal before you just, materialize next time, Jamie said as Ruth smiled, that beautiful ear-to-ear smile that Jamie found so enticing, so beautiful, so kissable. Jamie reached out. My name's Jamie. Yes, I know. I've watched you grow up. You were such a cute kid, always getting into trouble and stuff. Well, I'm sure not always, Jamie snorted as she lightheartedly defended herself, knowing perfectly well that Ruth had watched her go through life's cringeworthy young and dumb phase. Ruth nodded. Yeah, pretty much always from what I saw. Jamie chuckled as she regarded Ruth. Ruth, what happened to you? Ruth turned and stared at the southeast corner of the land, the same place Jamie had seen her on so many full moon nights. As you can imagine, Ruth said, thoughts of that night are still quite upsetting even after all this time. Well, that's just it, Ruth. I don't know anything about that night. Apparently my great-grandfather never told anyone what really happened. You mean you really don't know? Jamie shook her head. So you don't know what happened to me, what your grandfather was a part of. Again, Jamie shook her head and felt the need to apologize to Ruth. But apologize for what? What had her great-grandfather done? They murdered me, Ruth's eyes welled with tears, and they buried me over there. She pointed to the southeast corner of the land. All because I didn't know. Didn't know what, Ruth? What didn't you know? Jamie asked. That she, Ruth choked out as she locked eyes with Jamie. I just didn't know, she repeated and vanished.
Hi, I'm Dusty Miller, and my website is dustyjmiller.com. I live in Western Massachusetts with my wife, Dorothy, and I've been working on a mystery series. I'm on book 5 of the Alice Ott Mysteries. Alice is an older sleuth, kind of like Miss Marple, but with a social justice passion. In this book, the third in the series, Danger Underground, Alice and her sleuthing companion, Felicia, are meeting to help these women get started to organize against a dangerous pipeline. The group was seated at attention as if they were ready for a play or musical recital. It was a big living room, the furniture, rugs, and curtains as luxurious as a magazine house. Bernice came over to Alice, trembling as she shook her hand. "Thank you for coming," she whispered. The curious but silent women made Alice feel as if she had landed on a remote island. "I'm so very glad to be here, she said. I've invited Felicia, my good friend. She's also been working on our efforts to stop the pipeline. All the ladies looked very solemn. The hostess asked if anyone would like a beverage. Alice nodded her assent, but Felicia hopped up to examine the lavish display of candles, candle holders, and other scented items displayed on the dining room table. How lovely, she said brightly. What a good idea to mix serious organizing with such delightful collectibles. When do we get to do our buying? Margaret, the hostess, cleared her throat. The sales part of this gathering is really not important, she explained. It just gives us a cover for our meetings. And now that Haley is dead, we know we have to be even more careful than we already were. Alice decided to start with a very distressing story she had heard on NPR. It was about a pipeline disaster in Texas. Well, she began, they interviewed a young mother who had watched her little girl and her mother suddenly covered in flames as they were fishing in the river. The child survived, but the grandmother did not. At least 7 people died in the explosion. The pipeline was owned by the Get Corporation, the same corporation that wants to run the new pipeline through your town and mine. So I am honored to be here with you this evening. At that moment, the doorbell rang. Everybody looked at Margaret. She shook her head. I'm not answering it, she said. Bernice began trembling, while several of the women were still sniffling and wiping away tears from the story of the Texas pipeline explosion. Felicia reached over and squeezed Alice's hand as they heard loud knocking at the back door. Someone was determined to come into the house. The pounding continued as the women sat frozen in their seats. Alice glanced at Margaret. Can you find out who it is? She asked. Their hostess was very pale and her lips trembled. This can't be good, she said. Any neighbor or a delivery person would have gone on their way by now. No one seemed inclined to answer the door. Alice herself would normally march right into the thick of things, but she understood the fear in the room tonight. She stayed where she was. The knocking was so loud that it sounded as if the aggressor was about to put his fist through the door. Do you think you should call the police? Alice suggested. Bernice inhaled sharply. No, police, she whispered. I know you're in there, Bernice, a man's voice bellowed. It sounded as if he was inside the house. His voice was so loud. You better get your butt back home before I call the cops and tell your nitwit girlfriends you're all asking for it. There was a silence that felt thick as night fog. Bernice was shuddering. I'm so sorry, she whispered. A woman sitting with her on the large, flowery sofa put her arm around her and murmured comfort. Then Margaret brought her a box of tissues. Still no one said a word. Felicia finally stood up, smiling brightly at the group. We're having a candle buying party, for goodness sakes. Let's start buying and let the man in. He'll be so embarrassed he'll run right home with his tail between his legs. Shall I answer the door? There was total silence as everyone stared at Felicia in confusion. Alice looked at Bernice, who seemed terrified by Felicia's suggestion. Well, Bernice, she said quietly, what do you want to do? Bernice stopped shaking. Everyone remained still as statues. Alice wondered how many in the room had been at some time or other afraid of a husband or a father or a mother. Then Bernice lifted her head and looked right at Alice, her nose still dripping and her eyes bloodshot. I'm not letting him stop me, she said. I'm not going to let what happened to that family in Texas ever happen again. He can huff and puff all he wants, but I'm not quitting.
Hello, my name is Simper, and I will be reading the opening of The Fate of Stars. In the undersea city of Staloon, a mermaid tried to wish her mother farewell. I'll be fine, Talora insisted, placing a quick kiss on her mother's cheek. What can the storm do? Drown me? Her mother caught her hands, worry etched into her features. There are no stars out tonight, my Talora. What if you're swept away? You won't find your way home. The King's Guards even spoke of a ship on the horizon. What if you're seen? Then I'll wave or sing a song like the sirens they think we are, Talora laughed, though a glimmer of regret panged in her heart at her mother's obvious worry. Not that I can sing. Perhaps, but Goddess Stella will understand if the weather is too dangerous. Mother. Talora cut herself off, guilt filling her at those apprehensive eyes. Instead, she wrapped her arms around her mother's torso and held her tight, her pearlescent skin warm and familiar. I have to do this. I made a mistake, and this is my penance. Her mother kissed her hair and silently nodded. I'll return in an hour. No need to worry. With those final words, Talora swam out of their little shared home. The city of Stalloon was a beacon of light, her beloved home, but the dark sky held its own wonders. As she swam higher, the waters grew turbulent, but not wilder than she could master with her powerful tail. She clutched the string of beaded sea stars and pearls around her neck, the sigils of her goddess reassuring her of her safety. Water sprayed as she breached the surface, both from the waves and the pelting rain. Lightning tore across the sky, illuminating a distant ship struggling against the storm. Black clouds hung low, blocking any view of the stars, but they were ever present all the same. Last night the dark moon had reigned, no light cast from its silver mass. It had been a clear sky, the night the stars shone brightest, a perfect time for worshippers of the goddess of stars to pray and bask in her love and light. Priestesses in training were required to attend, lest they lose their vestments, and Talora was nearing the end. But she had been absent. As she lay upon the tossing sea's surface, she thought fondly of the beautiful girl she'd met, not that she ever cared to see her again. She hadn't meant to get so carried away, but she'd always been weak for charming smiles and full lips, and had spent the night admiring them. And so, after begging the high priestess for a second chance, or a 10th, she had been told to perform her prayers tonight instead. Talora's body rose and fell with the turbulent waves, and though she would have preferred to perform her small ritual on a peaceful night, she laid on her back and steadied her breath. With each influx of air, the waves became a lull in her mind, and Talora finally whispered the first words of her prayer, "Blessed stars who bring us light." Thunder rumbled across the sky, the bellowing roar assaulting her concentration. When Talora opened her eyes, she floated in the shadow of the approaching ship. Blinding light struck the mast, fire burst from the wood, despite the wind and rain. Talora's sensitive eyes saw stars and spots. In her panicked daze, she dove beneath the water. Her powerful tail kept her steady despite the tumultuous waves. A human plunged into the sea. A trail of bubbles followed the rapid descent. Talora barely dodged, then watched fear and shock flash across the mortal's face. This was a woman, Talora realized, a lengthy braid of hair floating beside her trousers, covering the slight curve of her hips. The human's body suddenly stiffened, and she did what all mortals did when plunged beneath the waves at night: swim the wrong way. Humans were feared, yet this woman was helpless, having fallen into Talora's domain. She dove, wondering if there was any salvation she could bring. Perhaps this had been her purpose this night, not to pray, but to deliver the mercy her goddess always preached of. When Talora grabbed her, the woman fought, shaking in her grasp. She spared a moment to smooth the woman's hair, touch her face, emphatically scream, "I have you. You're safe." In the dark waters, the woman's eyes followed the necklace of sea stars floating among Talora's locks of hair. Realization flashed through her features. She clutched Talora, and Talora swam. The woman gasped for breath once the water broke, only to be splattered by ripping waves and a spray of foam. She coughed over Talora's shoulder, her gloved hands rough against her slick skin. Talora swam toward the ship, and the woman at her shoulder yelled, "Lower a rope!" Amidst the spray and the thunderous rumbling of the sky, her voice was a drop in a bucket. Talora held her tight, her own mind frantically weighing options, when from the woman's hand burst a flash of silver light. Startled, she nearly released her, but the light combusted into flame, shooting up into the air as a vibrant beacon. Within seconds, a knotted rope fell into the water, its damp fibers clinging to the ancient wood of the ship. Was this woman some kind of sorcerer? The concept of silver fire rang somewhere in her memory, but Talora's focus rested in the moment. She swam to the rope, even helped the woman grasp it, who wrapped the rope around Talora's core, expertly tying it into a knot. Talora heaved when she was forcibly dragged into the air. As she struggled, a strong hand gripped her hair and slammed her head against the side of the ship. Stars flew across Talora's vision. She hung limply, rope digging into her stomach as darkness threatened to steal her sight. With all her waning willpower, she fought to stay awake, but next she knew she toppled against the deck. Her body smacked against the damp wood. The woman's hold released. Talora whimpered and curled into a ball, clinging to her sleek, scaled tail. Footsteps sounded amidst the rain. Talora's hair splayed across the deck, the stark white locks grayed in the dank atmosphere. Her head ached, but when a gloved hand clutched the string of stars and pearls around her neck and yanked, it broke apart. Suddenly alert, she dared to look up and saw an array of seafaring men drenched and exhausted from the storm, and her captor inspecting the religious sigils. The fire on the mast still smoked. "We thought we'd lost you, princess," said one, an old man who wore not the breeches of the men daring the storm, but opulent robes of purple and gold. He spoke Silveran common, and Talora understood him well enough. Their languages hailed from the common root of Celestir. The woman scoffed, standing tall amidst the winds, silhouetted by a distant flash of lightning. "Magister, the gods wouldn't dare." Her braided hair clung to her face in matted, salt-drenched loops, like dried seaweed. Talora had heard of Uplander princesses, known in stories for their legendary beauty and ostentatious tastes in clothes and jewels. Instead, the woman wore boots and a tunic dirtied from the salty spray, no finery on her person, her skin tanned and cracked from the sun. The princess tucked the broken necklace into her trouser pocket and knelt, her gaze matching Talora's. "You are an unexpected bit of luck, mermaid," she continued, her eyes calculating as they studied every curve and scale of Talora's body. She stiffened, curling tighter into her protective ball. "My name is Doriel Solveres, eldest daughter of Empress Vala. You are now property of the Solveran Empire." Thank you.
I'm Carolyn Elizabeth. I'm going to be reading to you from my most recent release, The Other Side of Forestlands Lake, published in October 2020 with Bella Books. The Other Side of Forestlands Lake can best be described as a paranormal mystery with a side of romance and a dash of family drama. Will awoke to the sound of someone speaking softly, thinking at first Lee was talking in her sleep. She felt Lee's arm draped across her chest, heavy and still in sleep. She sighed, relaxed and satisfied at simply being near her, holding her and being held by her. Despite old hurts, lingering doubts, and future uncertainties, Willa knew now, without a shadow of a doubt, she had made the right decision coming back here. She let the night sounds of the forest and warmth of Lee's body next to hers lull her back to sleep. Her eyes were just starting to drift closed again when the murmuring voice came to her again, louder this time. Nicole. Willa rolled her eyes, thinking she was on the phone. She checked the clock. It was not quite 12:30, and the night was completely dark, relieved only by the red glow of the clock. Willa eased Lee's arm from her chest and slipped out of bed. Her skin pebbled beneath her nightshirt, and she rubbed her hands over her bare arms as a chilly breeze blew down the hall through the open window in her room. Her brow furrowed, seeing the flicker of candlelight coming from beneath the door. She knocked softly. Nicole? Willa's heart started to pound, the night seeming to have grown still, the air in the cabin suddenly cold. Nick? She turned the handle slowly. Are you all right? The door creaked open, but Nicole didn't move at the sound as she sat cross-legged on the floor within the flickering light of a small circle of candles. The wooden spirit board was in front of her, her fingers on the planchette as it moved slowly over the board, whispering unintelligibly. Willa's hand flew to her mouth with a sharp intake of breath, the hair on her arms standing on end. Her heart thudded in her chest, and a frisson of fear skittered up her spine at the sight of her sister's pale skin and blank eyes, lit eerily in candlelight, while amorphous shadows danced across the walls. What is this? What are you doing? Warming up the board, Nicole responded flatly, staring at nothing. Willa stepped hesitantly into the room on trembling legs. Nicole, look at me. Shh. Let me do the talking, she murmured. Spirits can get confused. Jesus Christ, Lee hissed from behind Willa as she pushed her way into the room and banged on the lights, all of them blinking furiously with the visual assault. She took 2 long strides and kicked the planchette across the room. Are you out of your goddamn minds? Will? Nicole blinked up at her. What are you doing in here? Willa shook her head, looking between Nicole's confused expression and Lee's furious one. What's going on? She asked, unsure who she was speaking to. I don't fucking believe this, Lee growled, her eyes glittering with angry tears. I really thought this could work, Willa. You really had me going. I open up to you, and a hot second later, this is what I get? She was already dressed and crashing out the side door in seconds. Willa stared at the banging door, stunned by Lee's furious outburst. She turned back to Nicole. Are you all right? Yeah, fine. Nicole was already crawling back into bed. I have a headache, she mumbled as she burrowed beneath the covers. Aren't you going to go after her? Will swallowed hard, her pulse pounding. She bent and quickly blew out the candles. I'll be back in a minute and we'll talk. Lee, Willow shouted as quietly as she could as she picked her way down the road barefoot. She hugged herself against the chill in the air and the chill in her heart. She couldn't see Lee, but she could hear her long, angry strides crunching down the road. Lee, please stop. I don't have shoes on. Lee was already at the dock, untying her boat. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, Willa, but I want no part of it. Jesus, I can't believe I was this stupid. Lee, please, it's after midnight. Willa winced, rocks bruising her soles as she hurried to catch up with her. I have no idea what you're talking about. Sure you do. It's the witching hour. Did you just come back here looking for a good story for your next book? Lee spat, throwing the line into the bottom of the boat and stepping in. Did you figure you'd have some fun with me while you were at it? Lee, I'm begging you. I don't understand what you're saying. You left, Will. I get it. Losing Emily was terrible. It all sucked for a long time, and you washed your hands of this place and everyone connected to it. I grieved Emily, and I grieved you too. But I came back, and God help me, I dealt with all this shit. She gestured wildly around the lake. What? Willa felt tears pricking behind her eyes at Lee's anger. Dealt with what, Lee? I've got a good thing going here now. I'm happy, and Maggie's happy. Whatever trouble you're trying to stir up, Willa, you can keep it on your side of the lake. Safe with you, my ass, she finished before pushing off the dock and throttling away loudly. Willa watched her go for a moment, shivering against the cold night air as the tears began to fall. She turned back to the road, glaring at the light and shifting front room curtains at the Danforths. Nicole was already asleep when she crept back inside. She quietly packed up the spirit board and candles and found the undamaged planchette against the wall. Willa sat at the edge of her bed, clutching the case in her lap with trembling hands. She stared at it while her mind whirled with confusion and a fear she couldn't explain slithered across her skin.
I'm reading today from my latest release, Money Creek, and the only thing you need to know about this scene, which is toward the beginning of the book, is that Claire, my main character, quit her job just prior to being fired, and we find her now the morning after when she wakes up. Here we go. The last time Claire woke up with a stranger, she swore it would never happen again, but here she was, opening her eyes to a room she'd never seen before. She lay on her side, naked in a four-poster bed, as a familiar gut-clenching remorse made her stomach tumble. Her breathing became shallow and rapid. She didn't dare turn to see what kind of man she'd gone home with. It was still dark out, and only the glare of the streetlight poking through the window blinds lit the room. It smelled faintly of eucalyptus, very tidy except for the pile of clothes strewn near the door. Next to the bed was an antique table and Tiffany-style lamp, a pile of books stacked high. She skimmed the titles. What a man read would tell her a lot. There were the most recent releases from Margaret Atwood, Zadie Smith, and Emma Donoghue, contemporary fiction by women authors. Maybe she'd hit the jackpot and hooked up with a well-read feminist man. She turned to her right and found, instead, a woman leaning on one elbow, gazing at her. She had clear eyes, auburn hair hanging loose around her shoulders, and a slightly patrician air. Claire grabbed the sheet and pulled it up to her chest. "Good morning, Claire," she said in a timbre-rich alto. Claire stared at her with fixed eyes. Hearing her name made her feel more vulnerable. The woman had the advantage over her. Claire knew nothing, and she knew everything. She prayed she hadn't done anything mortifying. It was a good sign the woman was smiling at her. Whatever she did couldn't have been too bad. She broke her gaze and lowered her eyes. "Good morning," she said, her throat froggy from sleep and God knows what else. "You seem uncomfortable." Claire forced herself to look at her. "I'm a little nervous. I've never been with a woman before." "So you said last night. I hope it was a good experience for you." She hoped so too. She wasn't upset at having sex with a woman, something she knew would have happened sooner or later, but she was ashamed she didn't remember her meeting her or anything that came after that. Her short-term memory had been on the fritz. When she was in a blackout, she forgot everything almost as soon as it happened, which is why drunks so often repeated themselves. At least that's what she'd read in a depressing article on alcoholism. She scooched up to lean against the headboard and winced at the hammering in her head. She was beginning to feel the full strength of her hangover. "How are you feeling?" the woman said. She now sat in a lotus position facing her. Claire avoided her eyes. She seemed entirely out of her league. "Not so bad. Yourself?" "I'm surprisingly good, given how drunk we were last night," she said, "but I have no regrets." She reached over for Claire's hand and held it gently. "I hope you don't." "Can you regret something you can't remember?" "No, it was lovely." She looked on the floor for her cell phone. It was nowhere in sight. "Do you happen to know what time it is?" The woman turned toward her nightstand. "It's 6. Still time for more sleep." She ducked her head to meet Claire's eyes. "Unless you were interested in doing something else?" Her voice was sultry, as if she really desired her, which Claire found impossible to believe. "No, I didn't realize it was so late. I've got to go." She swung her legs to the side of the bed. 6 is late? "I have to get into the office. I work in a sweatshop." Why was she lying? She remembered she didn't have to go to work, that she'd quit the day before, but she was desperate to get away. She looked to where her clothes were scattered near the door. Apparently, they'd been in quite a hurry to get them off. "I thought you said you were a lawyer." "I am, and the hours are ridiculous." Claire took a breath before she slid off the bed and tried to walk in a reasonably dignified manner across the room to her clothes. She could feel the woman's eyes on her. "You're beautiful. You know that, don't you?" No, she didn't. Surely her outside looked as bad as her inside felt, a toxic brew of nausea, the hammering head, and a bucket full of recrimination. Her business suit lay crumpled on the floor, and she pulled it on before glancing back at the woman. She'd gotten out of bed and stood naked in front of her, as comfortable as a hand in a glove. She was at least 6 feet, a few inches taller than Claire, and 100 times more confident. Whatever actually happened, she'd hoped she'd given the woman pleasure. Usually her blackouts erased the memory of behavior she'd rather forget, but she would have liked remembering her first time with a woman, would like to know whether it was everything she suspected it would be. Claire had to clear her throat to talk. "Sorry, I have to run. I'll let myself out." "Wait." The woman came closer. Her nakedness seemed billboard-sized. "You seem skittish. There's no pressure around what happened last night. 2 adults and all that." "Sure, I understand. It's just that I have to get going." She stared at Claire for a moment before leading her out to the bedroom, to the front door. She seemed ready to move on herself. She held the door open, unconcerned at who might pass in the hallway. "The name's Ellen, by the way. I know you don't remember." "I do remember. Of course I do." Ellen raised one eyebrow. "Are you lying to me or to yourself?" She smiled and motioned Claire out the door. "Take care of yourself, Claire." "Thanks."
I am Karelia Stetz-Waters. I'm going to be reading to you from my woman-loving woman romance, Satisfaction Guaranteed, published by the Forever imprint of Grand Central Publishing, available for pre-order and coming out June 1st. This tells the story, and I'm going to start right at the beginning, of Kate Elgin, a sexually inexperienced woman who inherits her aunt's bankrupt sex toy store. Kate Elgin sat in the first pew at the Whole Hearts Departure funeral home, feeling out of place because she was the only person not wearing gold lame. She wore a dark suit, dry clean only, expensive, boring to this crowd. Her father sat beside her in a gold-lined tweed coat and gold bow tie. Her mother wore a gold dress. Around them, the crowd of friends and relatives passed flasks of whiskey. Kate recognized a few cousins. Before them, on the low dais, Aunt Ruth's urn sat on a pedestal, surrounded by white lilies. Kate had ordered them. White lilies were appropriate. She had Googled it. A man in a gold bowler came by and shook her parents' hands. "Roger, Pepper, such an honor to meet you." Her parents greeted him like an old friend, which he would be by the end of their stay. Her parents always made friends. A woman in the row behind them tapped Kate's mother on the shoulder and offered her a joint. Pepper accepted with a bow. Did you grow this yourself? She asked as she exhaled. The woman had. Cade stared at the urn. She should have visited Ruth. She should have gotten her over her I don't want to go to a nude beach and smoke pot with you thing, and just been a good niece and visited. Would that have been so hard? Okay, it would have been that hard. The chapel organ rumbled to life. Cade recognized the melody, the Cure's love song, followed by Van Morrison's Into the Mystic, and then Bruno Mars' Uptown Funk, which did not want to be played on an electric organ. How many pop songs did this organist know? She waited. Be careful, Cade's mother whispered as a jar passed down the pew. The edibles are powerful. I'm not going to get high at my aunt's funeral, Cade said. Well, if you do, start with one. Her mother shook a few jellies out of the jar. Thank you for the motherly advice, Cade said. Her mother patted her on the knee. It's okay to have fun, sweetie, but not at my aunt's funeral. Thankfully, Uptown Funk was the last song. The chaplain at Wholeheart Departures welcomed the guests. He'd known Ruth. She was the embodiment of love. After that, a woman lit incense and offered a call and response to the spirit of the universe. 2 drag queens wrapped a feather boa around the urn. And then there was a lull, like something was supposed to happen and hadn't. The crowd murmured. On the other side of the aisle from Cade, a woman with short blue hair and a gold tailcoat nudged the friend sitting next to her. Selena, it's you now, Tailcoat said. Her friend clutched a piece of paper. Cade heard her whisper, I can't. You can, her friend said. This is for Ruth. I'll fuck it up. You won't. Come on, Tailcoat said. She stood up, held her hand out to her friend. To the crowd, she said, this is Selena Mathis, and she'd like to say a few words about Ruth, but she's nervous. The crowd encouraged her. Speak from the heart, Selena. We love you, Selena. Tailcoat led her friend to the dais and left her there. The woman, Selena, looked out at the crowd. She was gorgeous. Huge dark eyes, curly black hair, secured on top of her head with jeweled pins. She had great curves, too, the kind of curves a person should not bring to a funeral, especially not in skin-tight pleather pants. Everything about her outfit said, look at me. Everything about her posture said, I think I'm going to pass out. There are no mistakes when you speak from the heart, someone called out. I remember, Selena began, her voice trembling, when Ruth told me she'd named her clitoris Belinda. There were eulogy mistakes. This was one of them. To Belinda, someone said. I remember when Ruth decided to turn her backyard into a bird habitat, Selena went on. All those finches. Her hands were shaking. Ruth was so many things. She looked at her notes. A gardener, a mentor, a businesswoman. She taught people that nudism isn't about sex, it's about accepting the sunlight. And she was like a mother to me. Selena wiped her eyes, making smeared mascara look stylish. It seemed like a good place to end the speech. Selena clearly wanted to be anywhere else, but she went on. And on. And on. Ruth's theories on pruning wisteria, teacups, tampons versus the cup. Cade felt like Selena kept looking at her with this help me expression. Cade's mother believed in telepathy. Maybe it could work. Stop now, Cade willed. Amen. You're done. But the woman had started the eulogy with the deceased clitoris, and telepathy did not save her. Thank you very much. I am Karelia Stetz-Waters.
The first thing that Bo noticed when she approached her apartment door was the wet mark under the doormat signifying that it had been moved. Thankfully, she was never one to leave spare keys in such obvious places.
She glanced over the railing around the side of the apartment and saw that the living room light was on as well, something she hadn't noticed when she pulled up. She looked out over the parking lot but didn't see any suspicious vehicles. Slowly, she drew her backup weapon and approached the door, but there was no sound coming from the inside. She edged it open and immediately noticed the leather jacket hanging on her coat rack, the bold emblem of the voleurs on the back. The second thing she saw was her massive brown and white pit bull Chubby, laying on the couch, wagging her tail at a woman with long blonde hair sitting in Beau's recliner, wearing a black t-shirt with that same logo opposite Vice Presidente on the chest, and a pair of chaps covering blue jeans that looked to be painted on. She carelessly threw the tattered copy of A Tale of Two Cities to the side and quoted, "It is a far, far better thing that I do than I have ever done." Sounds like complete bullshit to me, don't you think? What kind of stupid fuck gives up his life for a made-up notion like love? Beau glanced at her dog to make sure she was genuinely fine, and then turned back to face Cass Halliburton, who was stretching like a cat as she stood. "How did you get in my house?" Cass grabbed her jacket from the coat hook. "One of my many skills, Detective Alexander." Beau didn't lower her gun and moved into a better position. "And my address? Are you so invested in whatever you're doing in Galveston that you already knew who I was?" An eye roll preceded a sound of disgust from Cass. "Your address is anything but unlisted, Detective, and seeing as how your name seems to pop up quite a bit whenever one of my boys gets arrested, I'm well aware that you've had an interest in us for quite some time. Some of my boys told me that you were the one I needed to watch out for, but if finding me in your apartment is truly all you're worried about at this point, then perhaps I was wasting my time looking into GPD. If you're the best they have, then I have nothing to worry about." "So you're here because you're worried? About me, or what I could do to your business?" Beau took in the leather chaps, framing the perfect ass, the tight t-shirt, the way her hair moved. She was fucking hot, and she fucking knew it. Beau ignored the familiar pull she felt in the depths of her stomach. Cass's laugh was patronizing. "No, I'm not worried. You're not a threat to me, but I am here to warn you." They'd been circling each other like alpha lions preparing for battle, but the answer was so abrupt and without excuse and pretense that it stopped Beau in her tracks. "Excuse me?" Gone was the smiling woman Beau had walked in on, and in her place was a woman who had obviously earned her spot as the second in command of the largest criminal biker gang in the southern United States, if not the world. "I'm here to warn you, Detective. Galveston Police Department isn't prepared to handle what you'll walk in on if you continue to pursue my boys and me in our endeavor on the island." "So you're worried about me?" Taunting probably wasn't her best idea, but it was the only defense Beau had to being caught unawares in her own apartment. She was lucky she hadn't walked into a bullet. Again. "I enjoy my business, Detective, and I don't want to ruin what I have going here. Hypothetically speaking, killing you would certainly do that. So no, not worried. Warning. Stay away from me and my boys. Leave us alone, and we'll leave you alone. With all due respect, Miss Halliburton, this is my island, and I'll do as I please. Unless you want to confess to whatever the hell it was that happened tonight and tell me all about the chop shop you're apparently in charge of, kindly see your way out of my apartment." Cass moved into Beau's space, forcing her to turn the gun away or jab it into her stomach. Or what? More out of instinct than anything, Beau grabbed her by the arm and twisted it around, slamming her face first into the wall behind them. "Or else. I'm a cop. You've broken into my house, and you are here at a mass shooting tonight. There's no reason on earth why I shouldn't arrest you right fucking now." Surprisingly, Cass laughed, and it threw Bo off just enough for her to whip around and slam her fist across Bo's nose. She felt it crack and automatically went to cover it. As quickly as it started, though, it was over, and Cass held her hands up in surrender. Assault on a peace officer is a Class B misdemeanor. Take me in, Detective. When Bo hesitated, a slow smile spread across Cass's face. Except there's no evidence that I broke in. Is there? She glanced behind Bo in the direction of the bedroom. I could always wait for you to go get your handcuffs, and we can fight it out. Since you want so bad to bring me in for questioning about the mass shooting I was at. Then again, you didn't see my motorcycle when you drove up, right? The threat in her eyes was clear. She wasn't walking out of this apartment in cuffs. Bo snarled and yanked Cass up by her shirt, leaning in close to her. I don't fucking think so. When I bring you in, it's not going to be on some bullshit charge that you'll be able to talk your way out of. When I bring you in, everyone is going to see it, and you'll know for a fact it was me who brought you down. Did I do something to piss you off? The cocky smile was back. You seem overly aggressive. Bo opened the door and threw her out before slamming it in her face. For a split second, she contemplated doing exactly what Cass had suggested and running to get her cuffs.
I'm reading from Liar, Memoir of a Haunting by E.F. Schraeder, Chapter 1, She Resisted. All we wanted was a cabin in the woods. We didn't want this story. Hell of a way to start. Negative, right? Makes you wonder about the narrator. Is she or isn't she? Crazy, I mean. At the core, that question frames some of the best hauntings. Maybe that's the question at the center of this one, too. But that wasn't where we started. Once upon a time, Alex and I wanted to change our lives. Who didn't? Imagine an acre or two, different pace, a new place. After years of hostile state policies, we were ready for a break. State law made it clear couples like us didn't count, and I had a portable job. The hope of friendlier laws, fresh air, and green space pushed us forward. As the 8-ball fortune teller would say, outlook good. Now we're through it, out the other side, and I've collected a patchwork of memories and conversations into a collage. I did the best I could for someone who didn't want to do it at all. Because when Alex suggested I write this story I didn't want, our story, I resisted. Nothing happened. My mouth tightened. No matter how I shifted the pieces around, they didn't fit. Either that or I didn't want to look at them too long. Fear brews when you look too long at any one thing, and fear wins. Alex shook her head. Are you kidding me? Everything was bizarre out there. I mean, I don't know how you did it. I don't know how you spent a night out there, let alone 5 years. Alex stared like she was looking at me for something. Not at, into. Something else in her eyes, too. Not quite a question. A concern. I ignored it. Why? It was dark and it was quiet. That's it. I shrugged. There was a strange sensation, like... She paused. I held my breath. I knew exactly what she was going to say. A presence. And there it was. I nodded. The house wasn't haunted, I said. I know, but... Words stalled on her, clogged in her throat. That look in her eyes again, far away, more than a little afraid. Besides, it's all been done. What has? Jesus, the whole haunted house thing. A city couple sets out to change their lives. They buy a place in the country. Things go wrong. I did my best impression of a literary critic. That's not what we did, not at all. Are you kidding me? We're practically a trope. For a flash, the footage in my head backtracked, skimming the headlines, living off the grid, living apart, the messy, privileged business of house haunting, cross-state no less. Then at last finding the old sugar house, too good to be true. The sound of those damn trees. My focus shifted to an inner layer then, things I never told Alex. How any trace of optimism I had died a slow death in those hills. How I was afraid of everything now. People and isolation, change and stagnation. I was a bundle of sloppy contradictions, colliding dreams and nightmares like meteors destined to burn out before they leave an impression. I couldn't recall how long it had been since we'd gone on a hike or done anything that didn't involve some kind of colossal effort under the pretense of having a good time. Ever since we moved back, we're great, the happiest people in the world. Picked at too closely, anything crumbles. Write a memoir? I didn't even want to look. Are you kidding me? Alex's voice hitched up an octave, her eyes widened. I hadn't seen her that animated in years. I didn't tell her that either. The obstacles with the property, the weird vibe out there, the accident. You're a writing instructor, and you're telling me you've got nothing from all that? I shrugged. Alex pulled a blanket around her shoulders, as if even the memory made her shiver. I mean, what are the odds you'll be handed a story like that to write again? Hopefully. Astronomically low, I said. Besides, Shirley Jackson already wrote about the night and the dark. Alex glanced at the clock on the mantel as it chimed. Well, she lived in Vermont too, didn't she? Alex's eyes were on me. I was pretty sure I turned a froggy shade of green. A chill pulled at me from the inside out, like even the memory had a life of its own, a contagion. I wish you'd at least think about it, Alex said. It was all I ever thought about. She just didn't recognize it. I stiffened. Nothing happened. It didn't work out, period. I never saw anything. Did you? The question hung there between us for a moment, swaying like a noose. I didn't move. I couldn't. And she didn't answer.